You've never thought about where your morning coffee came from. Not really. You grabbed it, you drank it, you moved on. But that coffee, grown in Ethiopia, shipped across an ocean, roasted somewhere in the Pacific Northwest, handed to you through a drive-through window, is the latest chapter in a story that started thousands of years before America existed. Before Columbus, before Rome, before writing itself. And here's what's wild. You are connected to that story right now, not metaphorically, literally. The mug in your hand, the shirt on your back, the number system you use to check your bank account, all of it arrived in your life through routes that ancient merchants built with nothing but camels, courage, and the willingness to walk toward a horizon nobody had ever crossed before. We talk about globalization like it's a modern invention. Like the connected world we live in today, your iPhone assembled in China, your sneakers made in Vietnam, your gas pump from the Middle East only became possible because of container ships and the internet. But here's what nobody teaches you in school. Merchants were doing versions of this 2,000 years ago. Sailors were crossing open oceans without GPS, without radar, without satellite weather forecasts. Camel caravans were moving goods across deserts so brutal that a single wrong decision could kill every single person in the group. And the invisible web they built connected civilizations from China to Britain, from East Africa to Scandinavia, centuries before anyone in Europe even knew most of those places existed. This is the story of the ancient trade routes. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will never look at anything you own the same way again. Let's start with one object. Because one object is all it takes to break your brain, a small bead, carved from a shell, found in a grave in Afghanistan. Archaeologists dated it to roughly 4,000 years ago. Now here's the part that stops people cold. The shell it was carved from only exists in one place on Earth, the coast of India. 4,000 years ago, before the Roman Empire, before the birth of Christ, before the construction of the pyramids as most people picture them, someone carried a shell from the coast of India across mountain ranges, across scorching deserts, across hundreds of miles of terrain with no roads and no maps, all the way to Afghanistan, carved it into a bead, and buried it with someone important enough to deserve it. One bead, one impossible journey. And it changes everything we think we know about ancient people. They were not isolated. They were not primitive. They were not sitting in their villages, staring at their fields with no idea what existed beyond the next hill. They were trading, actively, deliberately, across distances that would challenge a modern backpacker with a smartphone and a credit card. And the world they built through that connection was far more sophisticated than anyone gives them credit for. But here's the question nobody asks. How? How did goods move across thousands of miles of desert and mountain before cars existed, before roads existed, before anyone had even mapped the territory? The answer is so simple it almost sounds wrong. They followed the money. Wherever there was something someone else wanted badly enough to pay for, a route appeared. Not planned, not built by any government, just worn into existence by enough feet and enough hooves walking the same direction for enough years. The ancient trade routes weren't designed. They evolved, like rivers finding the path of least resistance, like the internet routing around broken connections. Human commerce, it turns out, is as old and as unstoppable as water now. When most Americans hear ancient trade routes, one thing comes to mind, the Silk Road, and they picture something like Route 66, a single highway stretching across a map, connecting China on one end to Rome on the other, with maybe a few exotic bazaars in between. Stop right there. Because almost everything about that mental image is wrong. The Silk Road was not a road. There was never a road, not a single paved surface, not a consistent path that anyone actually followed from start to finish. It was a shifting, branching, constantly evolving network of routes, some overland through mountain passes that could freeze you solid in October, some maritime across seas that could swallow a ship without warning, some through deserts where the only landmarks were the bleached bones of people who had tried before you and didn't make it. And here's the detail that completely reframes how you think about it. No single merchant ever traveled the entire length of the Silk Road. Not one. Not ever. It worked exactly like a relay race. Goods changed hands dozens of times, moving from merchant to merchant, city to city, culture to culture. By the time a bolt of Chinese silk arrived in Rome, it had probably passed through 20 or 30 pairs of hands across 5 or 6 completely different civilizations, and its price had increased somewhere between 500 and 1,000% along the way. That silk was so expensive in Rome that the Roman Senate passed laws to ban it. Not because it was dangerous, because Roman men were wearing see-through silk garments to dinner parties, and Roman senators found this embarrassing. The ancient world had its own version of fashion controversies, but here's the thing. The Silk Road didn't start with silk, it started with a problem. Around 200 BCE, the Han dynasty of China was in serious military trouble. The nomadic peoples of the Central Asian steppe, a powerful confederation called the Xiongnu, had horses. Not ordinary horses, horses that were faster, stronger, and more powerful than anything the Chinese cavalry could field. Think of it like showing up to a gunfight with a knife. The Han emperor needed those horses, so he sent a diplomat named Zhang Qian westward on what was essentially a mission impossible. Cross thousands of miles of completely unknown territory, find allies, bring back horses. Zhang Qian was captured almost immediately, held for 10 years. He escaped, kept going. eventually reached the Greek kingdoms left behind by Alexander the Great in what is now Afghanistan, civilizations that China had absolutely no idea existed. And he made it home 13 years after he left. He didn't come back with military allies. He didn't come back with horses, but he came back with something more powerful than either. He came back with knowledge. He knew what was out there. He knew there were markets hungry for things China had. He knew there were goods in those markets that China desperately wanted. And the emperor listened. Within years, Chinese merchants were moving west. Central Asian middlemen were moving east. And the greatest commercial network the ancient world had ever seen began taking shape, not because any emperor ordered it. Not because any government built it. Because enough individual people chasing enough individual profit walked in the same general direction often enough that a network emerged. And now here's where it gets genuinely mind-bending. Because everything you think the Silk Road was about, you're wrong. The silk was almost beside the point. Yes, Chinese silk was so valuable in Rome that it was literally worth its weight in gold at certain periods. Yes, the Roman historian Pliny the Elder complained, in writing that survives to this day, that Rome was being bled dry of gold to pay for Chinese luxury goods. Sound familiar? Ancient Rome had trade deficit arguments. But the silk was just the headline. The real story was everything else. Glassware from Rome moved east into China, where craftsmen had never seen anything like it and were completely fascinated by its transparency. Spices from India, black pepper, cinnamon, cardamom, moved in both directions and were worth more than their weight in silver in the markets of both Rome and ancient China. Lapis lazuli, that brilliant deep blue stone that appears in Egyptian tomb paintings, in Buddhist artwork across Asia, and in medieval European manuscripts, came almost entirely from one single valley in what is now northeastern Afghanistan. One valley. And its stone ended up in artwork on virtually every continent. Paper moved westward from China into the Islamic world, then into Europe, where it eventually enabled the printing press, which enabled mass literacy, which enabled the Reformation, which shaped the entire trajectory of Western civilization as we know it today. The number 0, the single most important mathematical idea in human history, without which your phone, your car, your entire modern world could not function, moved from ancient India westward through the Islamic world into medieval Europe along these same routes. None of these things traveled with a certificate of origin. None of them came with a customs declaration. They moved because someone somewhere decided they were worth the risk of carrying across a continent. But I need to stop here. Because there's a trade network that history class almost never mentions, one that is older, larger, and more sophisticated than the Silk Road, and it happened on the water, the Indian Ocean Trade Network. 2,000 years ago, sailors had cracked a code that changed everything. The monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean blow from the southwest for 6 months of the year. Then they reverse and blow from the northeast for the other 6 months. Like clockwork, every single year without fail. If you understood the monsoon, and ancient sailors understood it in extraordinary detail, you could sail from the Arabian Peninsula to India in summer with the wind at your back, spend the trading season in Indian ports, and sail home in winter with the wind at your back again. Round trip. Scheduled. Reliable. The entire Indian Ocean became a highway. We know Roman merchant ships were sailing to India because we have found Roman coins, Roman pottery, and Roman trading posts on the southwestern coast of India. We have found them. In the ground, right there. Indian merchants were sailing to East Africa trading cotton and spices for ivory and gold. Chinese junks were sailing to Southeast Asia and beyond, carrying silk and porcelain back for tropical spices and exotic hardwoods. The Indian Ocean in the 1st century CE was as commercially active as the Atlantic Ocean in the 19th century. It was not a barrier between civilizations. It was a road connecting them. And here's where this whole story takes a turn that most people never see coming. Because the goods, all of it, the silk, the spice, the gold, the glassware, were almost secondary to what was really moving along these routes. Ideas. Buddhism traveled from India along the Silk Road into China. It didn't arrive with an army. It arrived in the minds of merchants and monks who walked the same roads the traders walked, stopping in the same caravanserais, eating at the same fires. And it transformed Chinese culture so completely that today it is inseparable from Chinese identity. Islam spread from Arabia along the Indian Ocean trade routes into East Africa and Southeast Asia, not by conquest but by commerce. Merchants who traded goods in the day prayed in the evening, and their faith simply traveled with them as naturally as their cargo did. Christianity reached Ethiopia via Red Sea trade routes before it reached most of Western Europe. The Black Death, the bubonic plague that killed somewhere between a third and half of Europe's population in the 14th century, traveled westward along the Silk Road from Central Asia, carried in the fleas on the rats in the cargo holds of trading ships. The deadliest unintended consequence of human connection in all of history. Every time two civilizations met to trade, they traded something invisible alongside the goods, something that couldn't be weighed or priced or loaded onto a camel. They traded the contents of each other's minds. Now let's talk about the roots that American history almost never covers. Because while everyone focuses on Asia and Europe, Africa was sitting at the center of one of the most powerful commercial networks in the ancient world, the Trans-Saharan trade routes. Most Americans see the Sahara Desert as a wall, an impassable barrier of sand. Here's the reality. For over 2,000 years, camel caravans were crossing it with the regularity of a shipping schedule. The camel, introduced to North Africa around the 3rd century CE, was the technological breakthrough that made it all possible. A camel can carry 400 pounds of cargo, walk 25 miles a day, go 2 weeks without water in desert conditions. The Sahara, which looks like a death sentence on a map, became a superhighway for commerce. Gold and salt and ivory moved northward into the Mediterranean world. Copper, cloth, horses, and manufactured goods moved southward in return. And at the center of all of it sat empires so wealthy that they make modern billionaires look modest. Mansa Musa, emperor of Mali in the 14th century. Most American students have never heard his name. Here's why they should. In 1324, he made his pilgrimage to Mecca. He brought 60,000 people in his entourage, 12,000 personal attendants. And so much gold, distributed so freely along the route, that he single-handedly crashed the gold markets of Egypt, the Arabian Peninsula, and the Mediterranean for over a decade after his trip. One man's road trip caused a regional economic depression that lasted 10 years. By most modern estimates, Mansa Musa was the wealthiest individual who has ever lived in human history, and he built that wealth on trade routes that most Americans have never been taught to think about. Here's the thing that ties all of this together. Every technological leap in human history traveled along a trade route. Every major religion spread along a trade route. Every major pandemic spread along a trade route. Every cuisine you love, the pasta in Italian-American cooking that traces back to Arab traders bringing durum wheat to Sicily. The chili peppers and Thai food that arrived via Portuguese traders from the Americas. The chocolate in your candy bar that traveled from Mesoamerica to Europe to West Africa and back again, is the product of ancient routes that nobody planned, nobody named, and nobody fully understood while they were building them. The people walking those routes were not thinking about changing the world. They were thinking about profit. They were thinking about survival. They were thinking about getting something valuable from one place to another and making it home alive. And in doing so, without knowing it, without intending it, they built everything. Next time you hold something in your hand, your phone, your coffee cup, the shirt you're wearing, try to trace it back, not just to the factory, further, back to the raw materials. Back to the routes those materials traveled. Back to the people who first figured out those materials were valuable and that someone on the other side of a mountain or an ocean might want them. You are holding the end of a thread that stretches back thousands of years, through deserts and oceans and mountain passes, through the hands of merchants and sailors and camel drivers and diplomats who never knew your name and never imagined your world. The ancient trade routes didn't just connect cities. They didn't just move goods, they connected the past directly to you. And every single day, without knowing it, without thinking about it, you are still traveling them. The horizon always had something worth finding on the other side. It still does.